Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Bryars. I am so thrilled to be part of Christina's Say Yes to Holiness Summit. Christina has been a spiritual mentor to me for years. She really is the real deal and just so full of wisdom. So I encourage everyone to get involved with what she is doing at sayyestoholiness.com. And I really love the theme that Christina has picked for this summit: how to pivot to our best selves in light of all the strange things that we're going through right now related to the coronavirus pandemic. I want to offer you 4 of my personal pandemic takeaways that I hope will encourage you. But before I do that, I'd love to introduce myself since you are kindly going to spend a few minutes with me. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. I've been married for 15 years. We have 5 children ranging in ages from 6 years old up to a 14-year-old. I work in communications as the owner of a small creative services firm. I teach in several universities, and I have the joy of co-hosting a podcast called Belle Curve. That's B-E-L-L-E, Curve, with just 2 amazing women who are good friends of mine. And I also write opinion columns for a number of newspapers in our state and do some speaking. I'd love to share with you about my path to becoming a Catholic Christian. It's not something I get to talk about very often, so I get excited to share it with you. So I was confirmed about 10 years ago, really after years of just grappling with the idea of becoming Catholic. I was raised in a wonderful evangelical tradition that infused in me really a love for the Bible, a love for theology. And when my husband and I got married, he started going to the Presbyterian church with me, even though he had been raised Catholic. But when his dad lost his battle with cancer, it was a very hard time, and as my husband grieved, he really felt a call to return to the Catholic faith that he had been raised with. And while I was very supportive of him and I understood, I felt like, well, I could never be Catholic. I was raised sort of feeling like the church was so wrong in so many areas, and so what I did was I decided to try to just dive into anything and everything Catholic and read up and learn as much as I could, really with the point of trying to convince my husband why he was so wrong and try to get him to come back to being a Presbyterian with me. Well, God has a truly wonderful sense of humor. It's hilarious to think of it now, but we ended up moving about 2 hours south of Rome to Naples, Italy. And so at the same time as I was reading books by Scott Hahn, and at the time the magazine was called This Rock, going through reading Catholic apologetics and lots of books by Protestants and just rereading the Bible, I was getting to visit some of the oldest oldest Christian churches and historical sites in our faith, and walk where Peter and Paul and the early disciples walked, and it was truly life-changing. So when we moved down to Miami, I decided to go through RCIA, but I still just was not sure that I could ever actually become Catholic. And I boldly asked God to please give me some signs and show me what He wanted me to do, and He graciously did that for me. And so here, 10 years later, I can't believe it's been that long, I am so grateful to be part of this rich tradition. And probably like many Catholic converts, I still look with such gratitude and appreciation on the evangelical faith that I was raised with. I hope that, one day we're all united, because our Protestant brothers and sisters have so many strengths, and the Catholic faith, Catholics have so many strengths, and I believe that truly we all need each other. So I just look forward to heaven when we're all united. So that was a long introduction. Thank you for letting me share that. That was fun. Let me pivot now to our summit topic of how to pivot to being our best selves in light of the pandemic. So here are 4 of my takeaways that I believe will help me pivot toward being my best self. And I really invite you to, take some time before life perhaps goes back to some semblance of normal and write out your personal pandemic takeaways. But here are mine. Number 1, it is okay to call your own difficulties suffering. Oh, my friends, let me just say, really from my heart to yours, that wherever you are, whoever you are, and really no matter how all of this has affected you, I am sure that this has not been easy for anyone. Yes, some folks have it harder than others, some much, much harder than others. I think it's very good to realize the range of suffering out there and recognize that there are those who, they need our prayers, they need our help, our generosity. But I think sometimes we don't allow ourselves to call our own problems because we feel so blessed compared to others. Sometimes we feel silly calling some of what we're going through suffering. We don't feel we have the right to call out to God for help for ourselves because, there are just folks who are having such a very, very hard time. My own aunt, who I'm very close to, right before the pandemic hit here in America, she learned that she had to have her arm amputated because of just an aggressive cancer that she has been fighting for years. And so all of the hard times related to the coronavirus really hit her like a huge second wave right after the major impact of losing her arm. And even though we might objectively look at her circumstances and think, okay, wow, she has it much harder than I do. What in the world do I have to complain about? I guarantee, because of the amazing woman that she is probably thinking the same thing about herself, that there are so many people worse off than her through all of this. My point is, whatever challenging circumstance that God has asked of each of us personally, it's all valid. It's all tough. There's no reason to compare and diminish whatever it is that God is asking of you. God cares about it all. He has the capacity to care about it all. We don't need to sift through and ask whether it's valid for us to call what we're going through suffering. Let yourself feel. And I'm saying that to myself as much as anybody. I don't like to feel sometimes. I don't like to be anything other than cool and calm. And I think my challenge at times is I'd rather intercept my feelings and sort of put them in a petri dish and examine them so I can dismiss them and get rid of them. But God gave us feelings, and He is such a personal God. He can teach me what He needs to teach me through my own struggles at the same time as He can teach you what He may want for you at the same time as He can be present for those who may be in a very, very desperate situation right now. I think that's why I really love the idea of becoming the best version of ourselves that Catholic writer Matthew Kelly first came up with. It's become the best version of myself, and you become the best version of yourself, not someone else. Which leads me to personal pandemic takeaway number 2 for me, and that is self-sufficiency is truly an illusion. Maybe I don't want to admit, when I'm having a hard time, because something in me dislikes admitting that I could need anything. I don't like noticing cracks in the illusion of independence, but we are interconnected. I am not self-sufficient. It's truly a delusion and an illusion, I think, to think that I am. I like what Sarah Young wrote for the April 30th entry in her popular devotional book, Jesus Calling. She said, quote, "The truth is that self-sufficiency is a myth perpetuated by pride and temporary success. Health and wealth can disappear instantly, as can life itself. Rejoice in your insufficiency, knowing that God's power is made perfect in weakness." Unquote. Oh, why is that so hard to admit? Our dependence on God, our dependence on others. Why is it so hard to accept my weakness? Why is it hard to forgive myself for not being perfect? My goodness, I still get surprised when I sin. Like, why would that be surprising? But if I'm being prideful and maybe obstinate, and maybe if I don't want to admit weakness, well, then sin can really weigh on you. It can feel unforgivable because you think you're supposed to be perfect. Well, that leaves room, I think, for Satan to do what he does best, which is to accuse us, to load us up with guilt, rather than us just saying, oh, of course I sin. Of course I'm not perfect. Of course I need God. I need other people's forgiveness. Thank God for God. Thank God he's not surprised at my weakness or my sin. When I get annoyed with my kids, or when the very last thing I want to do is serve my husband, when maybe I get wrapped up with self-regard or self-concern, self-pity, when I want to look good rather than actually be good, when I ignore the God who has given me my very breath, when I grumble that I don't want to need other people. I'd rather delude myself with the self-sufficiency illusion. Oh my Jesus, thank you for opening our eyes during this quarantine. Thank you for showing us our sin. Thank you for the wake-up call. Thank you for each other. 2 more personal pandemic takeaways, and they're a little bit shorter. Takeaway number 3, fortitude requires cultivation. So what is fortitude? Well, it's defined as courage in pain or adversity. So naturally, when we aren't struggling, really the less our fortitude is exercised, and perhaps more, we're sort of lulled into letting that trait languish. It takes strain to strengthen muscles, and sometimes it takes challenging times to sharpen and strengthen our character. But I think I should expect and plan for tests of fortitude by tending to my body, my mind, and my spirit during the good times, so that I'm strong and ready during the difficult times. It's super interesting to me how long it takes to build good habits, and how quickly sometimes those good habits can be broken. For example, last year and for some time before that, I had done a good job of building some good habits. I spent time in prayer in our chapel every day. I worked out at a gym almost every day. I read lots of good books and ate good food. And right before the pandemic, I sort of just got off schedule. For weeks, I did not go to the chapel. I didn't pray. I didn't spend time in the Word. I didn't eat well. I barely worked out. I was working a lot, but I let that get very much out of balance. And now I see that, I went into the pandemic a little weaker than I would have been had I not dropped my good habits right before we all self-quarantined and then later were asked to shelter in place. I want to make it clear, we're going to have our ups and downs, and sometimes we just need rest. But establishing those rhythms really during the good times, cultivating our bodies, minds, and spirits, perhaps while we're being led by those still waters, is so important for when life ends up requiring fortitude, when those hard times come. I mean, why do armies who aren't at war conduct exercises? Why do athletes train in the off season? Why should we, meditate and pray and feed on the Word of God and the sacraments when things are going well? Well, because tests of fortitude will come. We know that, and we need to be strong and filled with God's graces for when those times come. My last personal pandemic takeaway number 4, is that there is beauty and there are blessings when we are willing, where we are willing to find them. I am going to look back at this time, and I believe many of us will, with a measure of great fondness. I think of those times that my husband and I just took random walks through the neighborhood at odd hours and stayed up to watch movies together, the way that we first did when we were first married, the way it felt to ride a bike that I had not touched for years with my kids, just sort of riding carefree beside me, the warmth of my youngest son's cheek against mine when throughout the day he would crawl up in my lap and ask me to read books, laughter and long talks with my oldest daughter, who, when I think about it, this is going to be probably the longest stretch of uninterrupted time that I will have with her, probably for years to come. I think of all the Zoom mishaps and silliness and snafus. I think of online church with Father Schmidt, wearing t-shirts and shorts on Easter. All the baking experiments that my kids did. Some of them turned out, some of them didn't. We did camping in the backyard. Meals that we prepared and really relished without that stress of getting out of the house in the evening to get to all the activities. I think of the way that the singer and songwriter Casey Musgraves, her Golden Hour album, really for no particular reason, just became my pandemic soundtrack, and how I'm never going to be able to listen to another one of those songs without thinking of spring 2020 and just having all of these memories rush back. I think of all the amazing and inspiring acts of kindness and courage that we witnessed in our communities that I think really speak to the fundamental generosity and beauty of the human spirit. There's beauty and blessings mingled with all the mess and with all the hardship. I invite you to think of your own. I'll leave you with one of my favorite verses, and that comes from Isaiah 40, verses 30 and 31. They that hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar as with eagle's wings. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint. Some of the greatest stories we know are stories of rebounds, turnarounds, pushing through hardships, running and not growing weary. So that is my prayer for each of you. It's my prayer for myself and my family. From my family and from me, I send you huge virtual hugs, and I wish you well. Thank you for spending this time with me.